I had a dream that I was picking up this instrument and I knew how to play it. When it in actuality I know that I didn't know how to play it, but in the dream I knew how to play it, and all I saw in the dream was me placing my hands and playing the chord of D major. And it was so clear that when I woke up, it was almost like a photographic thing. I had it
Yeah.
in my hand. And so obviously I'm curious as to could this be real? It sounds silly. I will not tell nobody. So next time I see an instrument like this one, I picked it up and I'm like, well, moment of truth,
Yeah.
and I picked it
And,
up.
that, and it was a good chord.
That was the first situation. It was a good chord. Now it's a D major because that's what it was in the dream. And I
Yeah.
went and checked with another instrument and it was in fact D major. So I'm just telling you that it's just little things like that. It's hard.
We are pattern seeking people, and from the science side, that is what you call a sample of one. So
What does that mean?
it means if you're gonna test something, you want to test it multiple times, right? So
Oh,
it's like it happened, and that's the problem with anecdotes, because it happened to one person,
yeah, yeah.
right?
That's what I was
And
saying at the beginning. You
and
can't prove it.
well, hold on. It happens to one person, and they're very convinced of it. So there's two things that are possible: either it completely did happen, or their perception was off. But let's just assume that it did happen. You did have that dream, but it doesn't go further than that, because you can't repeat it. Other people can't repeat it. I mean, if we put 100 people under a sleep study and played guitar tapes and music to them, so the guitar ideas got in their heads, and then woke them all up and said, write down. And if everybody, more than a random chance, came out with that chord, then you'd say, yeah, there's something weird happening here that is actually happening that we don't understand. But it's
So the
fun
key
to
here is repetition.
it's fun to look at and reproducibility. It's
Oh,
fun to
okay.
look at individual stories, and sometimes it leads to things in medicine. But we can't do more with it than enjoy it as individual stories. So like if someone tells me that they had a spiritual experience that turned them to God, that's okay. I can't tell them it didn't happen, that they didn't feel it, they didn't perceive it. I'm not in their head, their shoes, their environment, their situation. But I can't take it any further than that.
I understand. Now,
So,
can I ask you
yeah.
something? Why would you personally, how as a scientist, would you personally approach a situation kind of like that, like what you just mentioned?
Mhm.
Let's just say somebody with the stage 2 tumor out of the blue, like literally not in a process of 2 weeks, but like from one day to another, or maybe not cancer, but something that is weird, is it falls into one of those categories that you say you respect, but because it's someone close to you and that for sure, like your mom or your brother or your uncle, it impacts you a little different, and you can't toss it or scrapple it like a piece of paper and put it, because you can't deny that it happened for the rest of your life. Like, does that ever stop bothering you?
Because I'm comfortable with the idea of
Not
that
knowing.
friend. Well, that's true, but that's a kind of a different thing. I'm comfortable with the idea that things happen. I mean, people come out of go into remission, and we sometimes don't know why. Let me give you an example story that's interesting.
Sure.
There's a pastor that I know, and he's very Christian. He's extremely convinced of all the Holy Ghost and everything. And he had a bad heart. He was in the hospital, and they were giving him treatment for it. And at one point they gave him an X-ray, and the doctor came back and said, I don't know how to explain this, but your heart seems okay. It seems fine now. And my first thought as a pharmacist is like, oh, I want to see the chart, I want to
Yeah,
see
of
the
course.
X-ray and all that stuff. But even there, we don't know everything. We can't determine every bit of physiology. But he was completely convinced
It was
that
God.
that God came and literally replaced his heart, took his old heart out and put a new heart. He said he had the heart of a 20-year-old again, and this was like a 75-year-old man. And he was
Thank you.
absolutely convinced of that. So, sorry, no, it just doesn't work that way. I find it interesting that he believes that, and when we had other discussions on other topics, I could kind of see how his mind goes to different types of false beliefs. But that's as far as you can go with an anecdote. I would think that there would be something. You go with the easiest, the simplest explanation first. It seems to be it's always the most likely. So you got to rule that out first. So the most likely is that it came down. Maybe the diuretic they were using him reduced the fluid in the lungs, and then he just got better quicker than the doctor expected him to. But to jump into the God gave me a completely new heart of a 23-year-old without a transplant. Sorry, I can't be with you. I'm completely convinced that you are convinced of it. But
That's it.
That's it. I'm happy for you. Nice to see you healthy.
Hey, and so if I may, only because I just couldn't help but think about it because you were talking about the ability to repeat,
replicate, yes, to do it again.
And again, as I promise you, I'm not trying to trick you into some type of answer. I'm absolutely curious. For instance, if it's a situation that you see a hand stretch out, maybe not come out from like somebody that didn't have an arm and it grew out in your face, but someone that had about 2 inches and difference as far as length in arms, and you saw it grow. Now you physically saw it, but you can't repeat that. And so I know that you're not crazy. You would probably wonder if you're going nuts, but once you do all the testing and you realize that you're not nuts, but you're like, I can't repeat that again, but I know I saw what I saw.
Well, the 2-inch growth, and it's usually done on a leg. To my knowledge, it is a classic magic trick. So I know that. I don't know how to do that. I mean, I've seen it done on a.
I wasn't thinking about that, by the way. It was an honest question.
So the honest answer is, I need more. So if you bring me a person with one arm and they grow an entire arm in front of me, I'm going to look into that.
Okay.
It's a difference of scale.
Yeah. So
we all know that magicians are quite talented.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that, and I do appreciate it. And I've got to go here pretty soon, but I appreciate your time, and I want to leave you with this. And if you could answer me this, the last one, and I promise I'll leave you alone. So when I was 5 years old, and you take this, I promise you I will not get offended at all. Take this with a grain of salt. But again, out of curiosity, as to what you think your thought would be, or the test that you would run to figure this thing out. So when I was about 5 years old, my uncle burned his hand a 3rd degree. He was cooking pork chops, and he covered them. It was for some reason like in a deep pot rather than just regular pan, and he deep fried them and he covered it up and he put it on high, and then he came back and he opened it and it just blew up and it burned his hand. It was a 3rd degree burn. It burned all the layers of his skin and the hand. And my mom is a physical therapist. A lot of people don't know, but physical therapists, they actually tend to wounds and burns as well. So she's changing now. I will admit, I'm Puerto Rican and I come from a Catholic background. I'm not Catholic now. But my mom was, and she grew up as a Catholic person, and eventually she became a Christian or what have you. And I think she was about 2 years into Christian at that moment in time. And so we're in my grandfather's house, and my mom is changing his wound in his hand. The procedure, you take the gas off and you clean the wound, and then you put whatever you put and you cover it back up. So as she was doing this, my uncle was complaining that it hurt so much and yada yada yada, and to the point that he almost seemed like he was about to start to cry, and it was kind of in a desperate. And so my grandfather was kind of an atheist, to be honest, and he was just basically calling my uncle names, like, and he was like he was calling my uncle names, but my mom, being a woman and I think to be more sentimental, took it more serious.
Be careful. Okay.
Yeah, right. I guess that being a recent Christian, she thought that asking God to help him, is not a bad thing to do. So she is like, well, let me pray. So she, and oftentimes when people are in pain, the last thing that you want to do is hear somebody, let me pray for you. It's like, I don't want prayer. I just want the pain to go away. But anyway, so my mom started praying, and she didn't pray for a healing or anything like that. She was just praying that the pain goes away. It was she just trying to calm him down so she could continue cleansing the wound, right? Yeah. And as she was praying, the more she would pray, he would start pulling his hand away like he was hurting him. And so when she opened up his eyes, skin grew. Like literal skin grew from.
It was back. It didn't. You're not saying it grew in front of her. It was back, right? Is what you're saying?
No, it was turning from white. It was turning to the red. So because the next day it was Monday, and we went to the dermatologist, who I personally think, because I was a kid, I was 5, but I remember the conversations. Yeah. I think the guy had to be an atheist, because even if he wasn't, he would have had a different attitude, because all he said was, look, all I can tell you is that congratulations, you're 8 weeks ahead. Like, for some reason, whatever it takes 8 weeks to happen, it happened to you in one day. Yeah. But he wasn't like, oh, it was God or anything like that, Yeah. But also he saw that the second layer grew from one day to another, basically. And he had no explanation for that. So you seeing that, if that were to happen, I know that's very crazy. And like I said, you could take it for the grain of salt, but I promise you this is a true story. So as my mom was doing her thing, the white stuff, like when the skin is white, in fact, the doctor was like, you feel this part right here? And he poked it with a needle. It's white. You don't have any nerves. So you don't feel any pain. For you to feel pain, you have to have the other layer. Yeah. And so that layer is what grew right there. How would you approach something like that mentally? Just like that doctor would, because we know that just doesn't really happen.
Yeah, I mean, let's just assume the accuracy of your story first off. I mean, because obviously we have the potential for inaccuracies of a 5-year-old memory and whatever. But let's just assume that the story is accurate as you're describing. Sometimes we just can't explain. I mean, for a nerve to grow back, it has to make a connection at some point, right, to the nerve next to it, whatever. That is not necessarily something that takes weeks and weeks. It may be once it's close enough and has enough connections, now there's enough signal to get through, because there's something called an action potential, where you have to get, even though you can have some signal in this nerve, it won't pass over to this nerve over here.
Yes, sir.
Until you have enough. I don't know. I mean, so what I'm saying is, like, I go to the physical stuff, and because that to me seems more likely. And if it's unexplainable, I will leave it there. Okay. Now, if you told me this story that, again, let's take it a little more extreme.
Okay.
That she unraveled the hand that was like all red and had no skin, and then the skin just kind of like grew out like a sci-fi movie and covered it, and it was like completely normal in 5 minutes. Something that extreme.
That would definitely trigger you a little more.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, then I would have justification for that. But the way you tell it, I have to keep it as an anecdote. So an unexplained anecdote.
Understood. I appreciate your input. I really was just curious as to how you would view it. It's really interesting how the people think, and and how they would perceive certain things. So I appreciate you, man. I really do.
Anyway,
I'm going to follow you.
Have a good night. Thank you. Follow me on YouTube too, please. I'm trying to give guys.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks.